Yo, welcome. I want to start this section on making drums with making a kick, because I think kicks are a good intro to drum synthesis, and also making your kicks is just a skill I think every producer should have, because it's really useful to make a kick that's exactly made for your mix, and to have your kick there as a patch, so you don't need to EQ it around or something. You can just change the sound design. Also, it's a nice intro to just using the grid for some sound design while still keeping it relatively simple. So I'm going to just draw a note in here, any note, because I will determine the pitch otherwise in the grid. So let's get like a polygrid here. My default preset is named weirdly, just ignore that. What we want in here is a sine, because I will kind of show you the most basic idea of a kick, which is just a sine wave. I'm also gonna get an oscilloscope here, set this to be note triggered here, and just set the pitch down quite a bit, just so you can see what's going on. And I also want to get a spectrum. Once again, the spectrum is less important for me from when making kicks than the oscilloscope, but it's nice, I think, for you to follow what I'm doing, to just have a view of this ready. So let's get a segments envelope, which is just a nice multi-stage envelope, and you can see here the sine has this sound output, and I want to route that into the segments here, and then set the segments on the left to one-shot mode, and just make something vaguely kick-shaped where I can kind of have like a loud attack bit and then it goes down. So you can see that's not a very good kick. I'm gonna set this to seconds, something like this, and then I'm going to get a pitch, because I just put in some random note and I want to use this instead. So I'm going to disable this button here, which means the sine follows our MIDI input pitch, and instead I want to use this pitch here, so I'm gonna turn this all the way up, and then I will set this to F0. Varying different opinions if it matters if you tune your kick to your track or not. I like to just tune it to F0 because I write a lot of kind of drum and bass type stuff in F, but you probably don't need to. Now, immediately we see one problem here. I want to create a reliable kick that's the same all the time. And if you look at this oscilloscope, kind of starts at different places because the sine wave is always running. So we want to turn on this trigger here, which basically just means the sine, you can see here, starts at the same time in the waveform every time. If I turn this off, you can see how this kind of shifts around and starts at different times. Sometimes start at the top, sometimes at the bottom. I just want to start it down here all the time at the same time. Then I'm gonna get the segments. I'm just going to turn smoothing off, which is gonna sound a bit ugly at first, so I'm gonna smooth it myself. I just like to have maximum control with this. And you can kind of hear, this is kind of a kick. Not really, it's a very bad kick. So what we want to do next is we're gonna get, actually let's use another segments for this, and just make a steep slope down followed by a sort of shallow slope down like this, and then map this to the segment's pitch and maybe map it for like 4 octaves, so 48 semitones. And now this is basically what a kick is. So you've got the sine wave with this kind of percussive volume envelope and this pitch envelope. By turning these sliders around, you can kind of shape it a lot. So this is like the fundamental. This is like basically all you need for a kick. And by just tuning this envelope, you can make a ton of different kicks, because tiny changes, especially once you've got the context of a mix, really make a big difference here. I like to give it a relatively short tail, so it's either full volume or not, and basically quiet. And then another thing I like to do, which is going to make this look a lot more complicated, but really isn't, is bring up this sampler. You might remember it from the first course. It basically has the same controls as this sampler here, but it's just in the grid, and like it doesn't have these envelopes, but it's got the playtime, it's got the different modes here and stuff. So, and we can just load like any kind of bit noisy sample will work. Hi-hat, because I want to use this to create the transients of the kick with FM, just because maybe use something like this. It really doesn't matter too much, just because I like how this sounds. Then I'm gonna get a different kind of envelope, which is called, I think it's called an AD envelope, so basically just like a spike here. Going to route this sound into this envelope and then take this output here and FM this by this. So you can see if we turn this FM or phase modulation amount up, or it adds this kind of spiky transient, which is, it's just nice to have like a bit of noise at the start. I'm gonna set this to digital, so I can kind of tweak these curves, and then I can pitch this around. And this is basically my kick patch. I try to not really mix these kicks at all. So I just try to mix these by tweaking this, and you will later see how I do this. But I think this can get you basically any kick you want. Especially more functional kind of kicks. Of course, if you get into like glitch hop or stuff, not glitch hop, but like hyper glitch or these kinds of very experimental genres, or hyperpop even, they often got like very fancy kicks with lots of different stuff, but like for functional kicks, for stuff like dubstep, drum and bass, hip hop, house, techno, whatever, you can get pretty far with just this kind of style of kicks, and you can get very clean kicks with this, which is like a thing I like. You can see how it's basically just has this fundamental here, has this kind of pitch envelope. You can see how it kind of sweeps down. And yeah, so one last thing I do like to do to my kicks, let's maybe turn this gain down a bit, just so you can see the kind of basic shape of this, is I like to use this pitch envelope and modify this fold by it. And this just adds some more harmonics, some more presence to the sound. If you overdo it, it's a bit much, but if you do it quite subtly, this will just help it cut through a mix, but we will work with this patch more later on. So yeah, that's kind of my basic kick patch. That's all you need to make a good kick, in my opinion at least. Of course, if you want to, you can add all sorts of effects, compression and so on, but I think it's easier to just control this. Like if you want to compress this, for example, maybe you want like a bit of a dip here, you can just do this. If you want more of a tail, you don't need an EQ, you can just do this. If you want the attack to be quieter, you can just turn it down here. I kind of like to fade this in a bit at the start, because this is a bit too clicky for me. It depends on the mix. Sometimes this is nice, but usually I prefer something like this. So yeah, I don't really touch this cue here. This kind of turns the sine into a saw wave, which like you can also map this to this envelope if you feel like it. I personally don't like to do it. I like to keep it like this, and then just tweak the different depth of modulation. You can hear how I like to turn snap off actually, and then I can just kind of move this middle point here around, and I can get a lot of different kick shapes. The nice thing about Snap is that if you put it here, and because we've modulated it by 4 octaves, we kind of know that, okay, this point is exactly 1 octave above this F0, so this is an F1. So that's kind of neat. But yeah, that's, I think, everything you need to know for now about kicks. This should go very far. We'll be using this more. I'll be working with this patch more, but this is kind of my basic setup for making kick drums. So see you in the next one. Bye.